Black girl spotted at laundromat every night. Sheriff bursts into tears after discovering why. In the eerie glow of the 24-hour laundromat, Sheriff Tom Hollis noticed her again, a small black girl, no more than 9, meticulously folding clothes well past midnight. Her threadbare jacket hung loose on her thin frame, a worn backpack clutched close. This was the 5th night he'd seen her, always alone, always at the same hour. Through the fluorescent-lit windows, he watched her methodical movements, her tiny hands sorting through faded fabrics. Something in her careful precision, her furtive glances at the door, spoke of secrets darker than the night itself. As rain began to pelt against his patrol car windshield, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that what he was witnessing wasn't just a child doing late-night laundry. It was a mystery that would shake their small town to its core. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Sheriff Tom Hollis hadn't always chosen the midnight shift. Once, his life had been filled with morning sunshine and family breakfasts, with his wife Sarah's gentle laughter and their daughter Emily's playful chatter. But that was before the accident 7 years ago, a rainy night, a slick road, and a drunk driver who walked away while Tom's world shattered into irreparable pieces. Now, at 53, Tom wore his badge like armor and the night shift like a shield. His salt and pepper hair had more salt these days, and the lines around his blue eyes spoke of grief rather than laughter. The small town of Bridgeton, with its population of just under 5,000, suited his need for solitude. Most nights passed with nothing more exciting than breaking up teenage gatherings or checking on the few businesses that stayed open late. The townspeople respected him, but they also whispered about the change in him. Gone was the jovial officer who once organized community picnics and coached Little League. In his place stood a man who seemed to exist in the shadows, doing his job with quiet efficiency but keeping everyone at arm's length. His modest house on Oak Street remained frozen in time, Emily's room untouched, Sarah's garden overtaken by weeds. The only sign of life came from the kitchen, where he made solitary meals and drank coffee strong enough to keep him awake through his long nights. Bridgeton itself was changing too. The once prosperous mill town had seen better days. The closing of the textile factory 3 years ago had hit the community hard, leaving empty storefronts along Main Street and increasing tensions among residents. The recent influx of immigrants seeking work in the remaining industries had sparked debates at town meetings and whispered conversations in diners. Some, like Tom's deputy Mark Johnson, advocated for stricter enforcement of housing codes and immigration checks. Others, led by Reverend Green at the First Baptist Church, called for compassion and community support. Tom had always stayed out of these discussions, preferring to focus on maintaining law and order without taking sides. But lately, something had been stirring in him, triggered by his observations of the small girl at the laundromat. She didn't fit the usual patterns of late-night activity he'd come to expect: no teenagers causing mischief, no shift workers grabbing coffee, no couples seeking privacy in parked cars. The first time he'd spotted her, he'd almost missed her entirely. She was like a shadow slipping through the night with practiced stealth. Her movement spoke of someone accustomed to going unnoticed, and there was a dignity in the way she carried herself that seemed far beyond her years. What struck him most was her solitude. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, how could a child this young move through the nights unnoticed, unclaimed, unprotected? The question nagged at him, threatening to crack the careful walls he'd built around his emotions. His fellow officers had their theories. Probably one of those new families, Deputy Johnson had said with a dismissive wave. They've got different ways of doing things, but Tom had seen enough in his 25 years of law enforcement to know when something wasn't right. The girl reminded him of Emily in some ways, not in appearance, but in the careful way she folded each piece of clothing, just as Emily used to arrange her stuffed animals with painstaking precision. The comparison made his chest ache with a pain he thought he'd learned to ignore. As another midnight approached, Tom sat in his patrol car, wrestling with his conscience. He was paid to protect and serve, but he'd learned the hard way that getting personally involved only led to heartbreak. The photo of Sarah and Emily tucked into his dashboard seemed to watch him, waiting to see what he would do. In the distance, church bells tolled midnight, their sound carrying across the sleeping town. Somewhere in the darkness, a child was making her way to the laundromat again, carrying secrets as heavy as the bag of clothes in her small arms. And Sheriff Tom Hollis, who had spent 7 years hiding from his own pain, found himself at a crossroads, knowing that whatever choice he made tonight would change more than just his own carefully ordered world. The night that changed everything started like any other. Tom watched from his usual spot across from the laundromat as the small figure appeared, right on schedule. But tonight was different. Tonight he couldn't ignore the way she stumbled slightly, her backpack seeming heavier than usual, or the way she pressed her face against the laundromat's window, seeking its warmth before entering. As he observed her through the rain-streaked windshield, whispered conversations from earlier that day echoed in his mind. Someone should do something Mrs. Peterson from the diner had said. It's not right, a child out at these hours. Others had been less charitable. Probably illegal he'd overheard at the station. These people, they don't follow our rules. Tom's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The girl he'd learned her name was Imani, from the elderly woman who sometimes did her laundry at the same time was methodically sorting clothes into washing machines. Even from this distance he could see how thin she was, how her movements seemed more sluggish than usual. His radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, we've got reports of suspicious activity near the old mill." Deputy Johnson's voice carried an edge of excitement. "Might be those kids again." Tom hesitated, his eyes still fixed on Imani. "Copy that," he responded finally. "I'll check it out in a few minutes." But he didn't move. Instead, he watched as Imani counted out coins from a small plastic bag, her face scrunched in concentration. Each quarter seemed precious, carefully considered before being fed into the machine. The sight triggered a memory: Emily counting out her allowance, deciding which candy to buy at the corner store. The parallel hit him like a physical blow, cracking something open inside him that he'd kept carefully sealed for years. As if sensing his attention, Imani looked up suddenly, her dark eyes meeting his through the window. For a moment they stared at each other, and Tom saw something in her gaze that he recognized, the same haunted look he saw in his own mirror every morning. Then she was moving faster than he'd ever seen her move before, gathering her things with frantic energy. Before Tom could react, she was out the door and running, her backpack bouncing against her small frame as she disappeared into the darkness. "Damn it," Tom muttered, quickly starting his car. But by the time he'd circled the block, she was gone, vanished into the maze of alleyways and shadows that she seemed to know so well. Back at the laundromat, he found her clothes still in the washing machine, warm and wet, abandoned in her haste to escape. Among them, something caught his eye: a small notebook, its pages warped from the wash cycle. Inside, in careful childish handwriting, were lists of numbers and times, marking the quiet hours when the laundromat would be empty, safe. Tom stood there, holding the damp notebook, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him. He couldn't ignore this anymore, couldn't hide behind his badge and his grief. Somewhere in this town, a child was living in fear, carrying burdens no child should have to bear. His radio crackled again. "Sheriff? Those kids at the mill." "Not now," Tom responded, his voice firm. "We've got something more important to handle." The time for watching from a distance was over. Tomorrow he would start asking questions, no matter how uncomfortable the answers might be. Tomorrow he would face the demons that had kept him isolated for so long. Tomorrow he would find out why a little girl needed to hide in a laundromat at midnight. But first he had to find her again, had to make her understand that not everyone who watched from the shadows meant her harm. The turning point came 3 nights later, during the worst storm Bridget had seen in years. Tom had spent those nights searching, showing him Manny's photo snapped discreetly from his patrol car to shop owners, shelter workers, anyone who might have seen her. The responses ranged from genuine concern to thinly veiled hostility. "These people," Deputy Johnson had said, shaking his head, "they come here, don't follow our rules, then expect us to clean up their mess." Tom had walked away before he could say something he'd regret. The old Tom might have let it slide, might have nodded along to keep the peace. But something had changed in him since finding that wet notebook, since seeing those careful lists written in a child's hand. The storm hit just after sunset, turning the streets into rivers and the sky into a canvas of lightning. Tom was about to call off his patrol when he saw a tiny figure huddled in the doorway of the closed laundromat, shivering violently in the rain. He approached slowly, hands visible, speaking softly as he would to a frightened animal. "Imani, it's Sheriff Hollis. You don't have to run." She looked up, rain mixing with tears on her face. Her clothes were soaked through, her backpack clutched to her chest like armor. For a moment she seemed ready to bolt again, but a violent shiver racked her small frame. "I can help you," Tom said, taking another careful step forward. "Please let me help you." Lightning cracked overhead and Imani flinched. In that brief, brilliant flash, Tom saw how blue her lips were, how her teeth chattered uncontrollably. Making a decision, he unlocked the laundromat with his emergency key. "Come inside," he said, holding the door open. "No questions right now. Just get warm." Maybe it was the storm, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe something in his voice reached her. But Imani slowly nodded and slipped past him into the fluorescent-lit interior. Tom found clean towels in the back room and handed them to her, keeping his distance. As she dried herself, he noticed things he hadn't been able to see clearly before: the worn soles of her shoes, the way her clothes hung on her frame, the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked quietly. Imani shrugged, a gesture that broke his heart. Without a word, he went to his car and returned with the sandwich he'd packed for his shift and a bottle of water. She took them with trembling hands, eating small, careful bites as if afraid the food might disappear. "Your mother," Tom said gently. "Where is she?" Imani stopped eating, her face crumpling. "Gone," she whispered. The coughing wouldn't stop. "The doctor," she trailed off, tears falling again. "And your father?" She shook her head. "Never knew him. It was just me and Mama." Tom felt something crack inside him, a wall he'd built around his grief beginning to crumble. "How long have you been alone?" "Since the hospital," she said, her voice small. "They wanted to send me back, but Mama said America was our home now. She made me promise to never go back." The implications hit Tom like a physical blow. This child had been surviving on her own, keeping her mother's last promise, carrying a burden no child should have to bear. "You've been very brave," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But you don't have to do this alone anymore." Imani looked up at him, hope and fear warring in her eyes. "They'll send me back," she whispered. "I promised Mama." Tom knelt down, meeting her gaze directly. "I promise you right now that I won't let that happen. But you have to trust me. Can you do that?" Lightning flashed again, illuminating their reflection in the laundromat window: a small, scared girl and a grieving man, both broken by loss, both searching for something they'd lost. In that moment, Tom realized he wasn't just making a promise to Imani, he was making one to himself, to Sarah and Emily, to the man he used to be before grief hollowed him out. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Imani nodded. And in that simple gesture, everything changed. The walls Tom had built around his heart began to crack, letting in light he'd thought he'd never see again. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles neither of them could yet imagine, but in that fluorescent-lit laundromat, as rain pounded against the windows, a new kind of family began to form. The following days unfolded like pages from a book Tom never thought he'd read. After that stormy night, he'd taken Imani to his home, her first real shelter in months. The spare room, dusty from disuse, became her temporary haven. As she slept that first night, curled tightly around her backpack, Tom sat in his kitchen, making calls and pulling strings he hadn't touched in years. The investigation into Imani's past revealed a story that kept him awake at night. Her mother, Marie Baptiste, had been a nurse in Haiti, fleeing political unrest with dreams of giving her daughter a better life. The immigration paperwork told a familiar tale: visitors' visas, asylum applications, a system too overwhelmed to care about individual stories. She was sick even before we came, Imani told him one evening, picking at a plate of spaghetti. But she said America had better doctors. Her voice caught. She worked cleaning houses even when the coughing got bad. Said we needed to save money for my school. Tom discovered that Marie had died in County General 3 months ago. The hospital records showed bills paid in cash, no insurance, no next of kin listed. They'd tried to contact social services, but Imani had vanished before they arrived. I hid in the hospital basement, she admitted. Then I followed the buses until I found the laundromat. It was warm there, and nobody asked questions. The town's reaction to Tom taking in Imani was mixed. Some, like Reverend Green, offered support clothes, food, prayers. Others were less charitable. Deputy Johnson made his opinions clear during a morning briefing. "You're putting your career on the line," Tommy warned. "Taking in an illegal immigrant? The board won't like it." "She's a child," Tom had responded, his voice carrying a steel edge that surprised even him. "And she's under my protection now." But protection wasn't simple. The more Tom dug, the more complicated things became. Marie's asylum application was still pending when she died. Imani's status was a legal gray area that made social workers nervous and immigration officials interested. One afternoon, while helping Imani with homework she was years behind but desperately eager to learn, Tom found a worn notebook in her backpack. Unlike the one from the laundromat, this one was filled with different handwriting, elegant, careful script in Creole and English. "Mama's diary," Imani whispered, touching the pages reverently. "She wrote to me every night." Tom hired a translator, and Marie's words painted a picture that haunted him. She wrote of hope, of dreams for her daughter, of growing fear as her health failed. The final entries were written from her hospital bed. "My precious daughter," the last entry read, "America must be your home now. Stay strong, stay hidden if you must, but stay here. Your future is worth any price I must pay." The diary revealed something else. Marie had been more than just a nurse in Haiti. She'd run a clinic in her neighborhood, treating those who couldn't afford hospital care. She'd fled not just because of political unrest, but because her work with human rights organizations had made her a target. "She was a hero," Imani said proudly, showing Tom a faded photo of her mother in nursing scrubs. "She helped everyone, even people who couldn't pay." The revelation added another layer of complexity to their situation. If Marie's political asylum claim had merit, it could help Imani's case. But it also meant the stakes were even higher. Meanwhile, Tom faced his own demons. Emily's room remained closed, but its presence weighed on him differently now. One night he found Imani standing in the hallway, staring at the door. "Who lived there?" she asked softly. Tom's throat tightened. "My daughter, Emily. She and my wife. They're gone now." Imani was quiet for a long moment. "Does it hurt less, missing them?" "No," Tom answered honestly. "But sometimes it hurts differently. Like now." She slipped her small hand into his, and they stood there together, two souls who understood loss too well, finding comfort in shared pain. The investigation continued, piecing together Marie and Imani's journey. Each revelation brought new challenges, new threats to the fragile stability they were building. But it also brought unexpected allies: a retired immigration lawyer who took their case pro bono, a Haitian community in the next town over who could verify Marie's story, even some of Tom's old colleagues from his days in the state police. Yet as support grew, so did opposition. Anonymous calls to the station questioned Tom's judgment. Letters arrived at his desk suggesting he was neglecting his duties. The town council scheduled a hearing about recent law enforcement priorities. Through it all, Imani continued to attend the school Tom had enrolled her in, worked with tutors to catch up, and slowly, cautiously began to believe in the possibility of a future. But sometimes, late at night, Tom would find her in the laundry room of his house, folding and refolding clothes with that same careful precision he'd first noticed through the laundromat window. Old habits he learned died hard. The same could be said for old wounds. But maybe, just maybe, they could help each other heal. The storm that swept through Bridgeton 6 months into Imani's stay was unprecedented. Hurricane warnings had been issued, but nobody expected the sheer ferocity of the deluge. As rain pounded against his windows, Tom received the call that would shatter their carefully constructed new normal. Sheriff Deputy Johnson's voice crackled through static. "We've got reports of flooding at the elementary school. Some kids are still trapped inside." Tom's heart stopped. Imani's school. He'd dropped her off that morning, despite the weather warnings, trusting the school administration's decision to remain open. Now racing through flooded streets in his patrol car, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the torrent, he cursed his judgment. The school building loomed ahead, partially submerged in muddy water. Emergency vehicles' lights painted the rain in alternating red and blue. Parents huddled under umbrellas, calling out names. Tom's eyes scanned frantically for a small figure in a blue raincoat, Imani's favorite, bought just last week. "She's not here," M.S. Thompson, Imani's teacher, confirmed when he found her. "She left during the early dismissal, but she hesitated. She said something about the laundromat. I thought I heard wrong." The laundromat. Of course. Despite months of therapy and stable home life, it remained Imani's safe place, where she retreated when overwhelmed or scared. But the laundromat was on the other side of town, across the now flooding river. "Tom, you can't go." Deputy Johnson grabbed his arm as he turned to leave. "The bridge is underwater. Emergency services have closed all crossings." Tom shook him off. "That's my daughter out there." The words came naturally now, surprising even him. But there was no time to dwell on it. He gunned the engine of his patrol car, ignoring calls from his deputies. The familiar streets had become alien waterways, debris floating past like bizarre parade floats. Halfway to the bridge, he spotted something that made his blood run cold: a small blue raincoat, caught on a fence, flapping like a surrender flag in the wind. Beyond it, the surging river had indeed breached its banks, turning the bridge into a deadly water crossing. Tom abandoned his car, the rain soaking him instantly. "Imani," his voice was lost in the storm's howl. "Imani." A flash of movement caught his eye across the churning water. A tiny figure fought against the wind, trying to reach the laundromat's familiar sanctuary. Even from this distance, he could see she was struggling. Without hesitation, Tom waded into the flood. The water was shockingly cold, the current stronger than he'd anticipated. Each step was a battle, debris slamming against his legs. But he kept his eyes fixed on Imani, who had finally reached the laundromat's door. "Stay there," he shouted. "I'm coming." Whether she heard him or not, she disappeared inside. Tom fought harder against the current, his police training warring with parental terror. The water was up to his chest now, each step a gamble between solid ground and hidden holes. He was 20 feet from the laundromat when he heard the crash. The building's front window had given way under the water's pressure. Through the gap, he could see Imani scrambling onto a washing machine, clutching something to her chest. Hold on, the words were more prayer than command. With a final surge of strength, Tom reached the broken window. Glass sliced his hands as he pulled himself through, but he barely felt it. Inside, the water was rising rapidly, washing away the scent of detergent and fabric softener that had become so familiar. Daddy Imani's cry pierced through the storm's chaos. She'd never called him that before. He reached her just as her perch began to shift, the washing machine yielding to the flood's power. Scooping her up, he realized what she'd risked her life to save her mother's diary, wrapped in plastic bags. "I couldn't lose her again," Imani sobbed into his shoulder. The journey back was a blur of cold and fear and desperate determination. Later he would learn that rescue teams had been minutes behind him, that his actions had violated every safety protocol in the book. But in that moment, nothing mattered except getting Imani to safety. When they finally reached dry ground, emergency workers rushed to wrap them in blankets. Through chattering teeth, Imani kept apologizing. "I was so scared," she whispered. "The rain. It reminded me of the night, Mama." Tom held her closer, his own tears mixing with rain and river water. "I will always find you," he promised. "Always." Around them, the storm began to ease, as if satisfied with the drama it had unleashed. But something had been washed away in those floodwaters, the last barriers between a broken man and a lost girl, between past pain and future hope. In risking everything to save each other, they had finally truly become father and daughter. The first signs appeared subtly: a lingering cough, dark circles under Imani's eyes that wouldn't fade. Tom initially attributed it to stress from the flood ordeal, but when he found her doubled over in pain one morning, memories of Marie's final diary entries flashed through his mind. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on Imani's small frame as doctors rushed her through endless tests. Tom paced the waiting room, the same one where, unknown to him, Marie had spent her final days. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Please, God," he whispered, surprising himself. He hadn't prayed since Sarah and Emily's funeral. Not again. Not her too. Reverend Green found him there, slumped in an uncomfortable chair, clutching Imani's mother's diary. The older man sat quietly beside him. "She has the same symptoms," Tom's voice cracked. "The same cough Marie had. I can't lose another child." "Faith," Thomas the Reverend said softly. "Sometimes it's all we have." The diagnosis, when it came, was both a relief and a terror: severe pneumonia, complicated by malnutrition from her months alone. Treatable, but serious. Tom watched through the window as machines beeped and tubes carried medicine into his daughter's frail body. "Your mama was right here," he heard Imani whisper one night, her fever-bright eyes fixed on the ceiling. "She said the angels were coming, but she didn't want to go without me." Tom's heart clenched. He'd been reading Marie's diary, trying to understand. The final pages described her fear, not of death, but of leaving Imani alone. "Mon ange," she'd written, "my angel, forgive me for leaving you." During the long nights at the hospital, Tom found himself talking to Marie, to Sarah, to anyone who might be listening. "Help me keep her safe," he pleaded. "Show me how to be what she needs." The Haitian community that had been helping with their case filled the hospital's small chapel, their prayers mixing French, Creole, and English. Their voices carried down the sterile hallways, a melody of hope and faith that seemed to wrap around Imani's room like a protective blanket. One evening, as Imani's fever finally began to break, she grabbed Tom's hand. "I saw them," she whispered. "Saw who, sweetheart?" "Mama. And a lady with blonde hair like in your pictures. They were watching over us. Mama said it's okay now. She said, 'I have you.'" Tom felt tears slide down his cheeks. Whether it was fever dreams or something more divine, he didn't care. The peace on Imani's face was real. Recovery was slow. Tom took leave from work, spending days reading to her from Marie's diary, learning Creole phrases that made Imani smile despite her pain. The hospital staff watched the transformation of the once lonely sheriff, how his gruff exterior softened when spelling out Haitian words, how his eyes lit up at each small sign of improvement. Your mother was right, he told Imani one afternoon, about America being your home. But home isn't just a place, it's people. It's family. Like you and me, she asked sleepily. Like you and me, he confirmed. And maybe your mama and my Sarah and Emily are watching too. One big family. The day Imani was released, Reverend Green performed a blessing, mixing traditions from both their worlds. The Haitian congregation sang hymns of thanksgiving while Tom's fellow officers stood guard, a bridge between communities that had once seemed impossibly far apart. As they drove home, Imani clutching both her mother's diary and a new journal of her own, Tom realized something had shifted in him. The grief that had been his constant companion for 7 years hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. Where there had been emptiness, there was now purpose. Where there had been silence, there were prayers not just of desperation, but of gratitude. Mama always said God works in mysterious ways, Imani mused, looking out at the town they both now truly called home. Tom smiled, remembering Sarah saying something similar long ago. Perhaps she'd been right too. Perhaps all of this, the pain, the loss, the unexpected joy of finding each other, was part of a larger story, one written with more wisdom than he could comprehend. That night, for the first time since moving in, Imani slept in Emily's room, now repainted in her favorite colors, but with a small photo of both families on the nightstand. As Tom tucked her in, he felt the presence of all those they'd lost and found, a tapestry of love woven from grief and hope, faith and family. "Good night, mon ange," he whispered, the Creole words feeling right on his tongue. "Your whole family loves you." The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its official government seal standing stark against the white envelope. Tom's hands trembled as he read its contents, the legal jargon boiling down to one devastating message: Immigration and Customs Enforcement was challenging his guardianship of Imani. Deputy Johnson's influence had reached further than expected. He'd filed reports questioning the legality of Tom's actions, suggesting professional misconduct in harboring an undocumented minor. The town council, divided by the controversy, had called an emergency meeting. "This is about more than one child," Councilman Peters declared. "It's about law and order in our community. Sheriff Hollis has overstepped his bounds." But as Tom sat there listening to debates about protocols and precedents, a discovery at Imani's school changed everything. Her art teacher, Mrs. Rivera, had found something extraordinary: a collection of drawings hidden in Imani's desk. The pictures told a story, detailed sketches of hospital rooms, a woman in a nurse's uniform tending to patients, scenes of violence in Haiti. But what caught everyone's attention was the artistic skill displayed. They were remarkably similar to works hanging in Tom's house, drawings signed by Emily. "I've never seen such similar styles," Mrs. Rivera explained, laying out the pictures. "It's almost as if." Tom remembered something then: Sarah mentioning her grandmother's Haitian heritage, a family history he'd never fully explored. Could it be possible? The timing, the connections, the inexplicable pull he'd felt toward Imani from the start. Racing home, he dug through old family albums until he found a yellowed photograph of Sarah's grandmother as a young woman, standing in front of a clinic in Haiti. The same clinic mentioned in Marie's diary. The revelation spread through town like wildfire. The sheriff's lost wife had Haitian roots, connecting him to the very community some wanted to reject. Imani wasn't just a child he'd taken in, she was, however distantly, family. It doesn't change the legal issues, his lawyer warned, but it adds a compelling narrative to our case. Yet Tom knew it was more than that. It explained the mysterious familiarity he'd felt, the way Imani's mannerisms sometimes echoed Emily's, the deep connection that had formed between them. When he showed Imani the old photograph, her eyes grew wide. "Mama used to talk about that clinic," she whispered. "She said it was where she learned to be a nurse. She said angels worked there." The coincidence, or perhaps providence, shifted public opinion. Those who had opposed Tom's guardianship struggled to argue against what seemed like destiny itself. Even Deputy Johnson fell silent in the face of this unexpected twist. But the most profound impact was on Tom and Imani themselves. The knowledge that they shared more than just grief and circumstance, that their connection had roots reaching back generations, gave their makeshift family a sense of legitimacy that no legal document could provide. Maybe this is why Imani said one evening, tracing the faces in the old photograph, "Maybe this is why you found me at the laundromat. Maybe we were always supposed to be family." Tom pulled her close, marveling at how the universe had brought them together, how love could bridge gaps of time and culture and loss. The legal battles weren't over, but now they faced them with renewed strength, knowing their bond was written in more than just court documents. It was written in shared blood, in artistic talent passed down through generations, in the mysterious ways that families find their way back to each other, even across oceans of time and sorrow. The custody battle erupted like a sudden storm in what had been relatively calm waters. Deputy Johnson's allegations had sparked a formal investigation into Tom's conduct as sheriff, and the immigration authorities were pressing their case with renewed vigor. The morning of the first hearing, Tom found Imani in her room, methodically folding and refolding her clothes, her old coping mechanism resurging under stress. "We're going to get through this," he promised, kneeling beside her. "Together." But the courthouse proved to be a battlefield of a different kind. The prosecution painted Tom as an emotionally compromised officer who had overstepped his authority, potentially compromising multiple ongoing investigations. They questioned his judgment, citing his past trauma and suggesting that his grief over losing his family had clouded his professional discretion. Sheriff Hollis's actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, demonstrate a disturbing pattern of disregard for proper procedure, the prosecutor argued. His emotional attachment to this case has compromised his ability to serve as an effective law enforcement officer. Tom sat stoically, feeling the weight of every accusation, but it was watching Imani testify that nearly broke him. She sat in the witness chair, looking impossibly small in her best dress, answering questions about her mother's death, her months alone, her life with Tom. "He saved me," she said simply, her voice clear despite her trembling hands. "Not just from being alone, but from being scared all the time. He's my father now." The prosecution was relentless. "But he's not your legal guardian, is he? And you're in this country without proper documentation, isn't that right?" Before Imani could answer, she began coughing the same deep, racking cough that had preceded her hospitalization. The court called a recess, but the damage was done. Tom found her in the bathroom, crying and gasping for breath. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm making everything worse." Tom held her, his badge feeling heavy against his chest. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing." But the stress took its toll. Imani's health began to deteriorate again, the trauma of the court proceedings reopening old wounds. Tom's career hung by a thread, with the town council discussing his suspension pending the investigation's outcome. It was Reverend Green who rallied the community. He organized a peaceful vigil outside the courthouse, bringing together both longtime residents and immigrant families. The Haitian community showed up in force, sharing stories of Marie's work at the clinic, of how she had helped others even while struggling herself. Mrs. Rivera testified about Imani's artistic talent, presenting the drawings that had revealed their family connection. "This isn't just about genetics," she argued. "This is about two souls who found each other when they needed it most." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Deputy Johnson's wife, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, stepped forward with a shocking revelation. Her husband's vendetta against Tom and Imani stemmed from a personal tragedy. They had lost their own daughter to illness years ago, and watching Tom build a new family had stirred up unresolved grief and resentment. "This has to stop," she testified, her husband sitting rigid in the gallery. "We're destroying a family to punish a man for doing what any good father would do." The testimony shifted the narrative. What had been a case about legal procedures and professional conduct became a story about healing, about the ways grief can either break us or transform us into something stronger. Tom's attorney presented Marie's diary, now translated in full, revealing the depth of her sacrifice and her hopes for Imani's future in America. The distant family connection, while legally tenuous, added weight to their argument that this placement was not random but somehow meant to be. As the hearing stretched on, Tom noticed changes in his department. Officers who had been skeptical began leaving anonymous notes of support. Community members stepped forward offering legal help, medical care, anything they could contribute to keeping Imani safe and healthy. The final day of testimony, Tom took the stand. Looking at Imani in the gallery, he spoke from his heart. 7 years ago, I lost my family and with them my purpose. I became a shadow of myself, hiding in the night shift, avoiding connections. Then I found a little girl alone in a laundromat, carrying burdens no child should bear. In trying to save her, I saved myself. She's my daughter now, in every way that matters. Taking her away won't serve justice. It will only create more broken people in a world that already has too many. The courtroom fell silent. Even the prosecutor seemed moved. In that moment, the battle lines that had divided the town began to blur, replaced by a simple truth: sometimes family is born not from blood or law, but from the simple act of choosing to love another person when they need it most. The judge called a recess to consider her ruling, and Tom and Imani waited together, their hands clasped, their futures hanging in the balance. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else together. It was during the tense wait for the judge's final ruling that the most extraordinary discovery emerged. Mrs. Rivera, still intrigued by Imani's artistic talents, had organized an exhibition of student artwork at the school. Among Imani's displayed pieces was a detailed drawing of the laundromat at night, but it wasn't the subject that caught everyone's attention, it was what was hidden within it. Woven into the shadowy corners of the artwork were faces, dozens of them, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Children's faces, all with the same haunted eyes Imani had worn when Tom first found her. When questioned about them, Imani broke down. "They're the others," she whispered. "The ones who came to the laundromat too. We took care of each other." The revelation stunned the community. The laundromat hadn't just been Imani's sanctuary, it had been a secret refuge for other displaced children, each taking turns keeping watch, sharing what little food they had, looking out for one another in the dark hours when the rest of the world slept. Tom felt his world shift again. "Where are they now?" he asked gently. Imani's answer broke his heart. "They scattered when you started watching. They thought you would catch them. I was the only one who stayed." The news spread quickly through the town. Other business owners began coming forward, speaking of glimpses they'd caught, children vanishing into shadows, small items going missing only to be replaced with carefully counted change, evidence of silent struggles happening right under their noses. But it was what they found in Marie's diary that changed everything. Hidden between the pages, written in tiny script, were names and details, a carefully maintained record of other families separated by illness, poverty, or immigration issues. Marie hadn't just been treating patients at the hospital, she'd been part of an underground network helping displaced children find safe spaces. "Your mother was protecting more than just you," Tom told Imani, his voice thick with emotion. "She was trying to protect all of them." The discovery transformed the custody battle into something larger. It wasn't just about one sheriff and one little girl anymore, it was about exposing a crisis that had been invisible to most of the community. The faces in Imani's drawing became a powerful testament to the hidden struggles of families torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. But the most startling revelation came from an unexpected source. While cleaning out Emily's old room to make space for Imani's things, they found a diary of their own. Emily, it seemed, had known about the children at the laundromat. Her last entry, dated just days before the accident, spoke of her plans to help them. "Dad's a sheriff," she had written. "He could help these kids if he knew. Maybe that's what I'll do when I grow up, help people like he does." The parallel between Emily's last wish and what Tom was doing now with Imani seemed almost too perfect to be coincidence. When he showed the diary to Imani, she traced Emily's words with trembling fingers. She knew, Imani said softly. "She was trying to help us even before you found me." The discovery seemed to seal their connection in a way that even their distant blood ties couldn't match. Emily's compassion had somehow reached across time, guiding her father to continue the work she'd never had the chance to begin. Deputy Johnson's wife was the first to step forward after learning about the other children. "We can't change the past," she said at a town council meeting, her husband notably absent. "But we can honor both Marie and Emily's memories by doing better now." A task force was formed, combining resources from law enforcement, social services, and community organizations. Their mission wasn't to punish or prosecute, but to find these children and offer them the same chance at safety and family that Imani had found. Imani's artwork became a symbol of this new initiative. Her ability to capture both suffering and hope in her drawings spoke to something universal: the resilience of children, the importance of community, the power of seeing what others had overlooked. As they waited for the judge's decision, Tom realized that whatever happened, something profound had already been achieved. The truth Imani had carried in her heart, expressed through her art, had awakened their town to a reality they'd been too comfortable ignoring. "Your mother would be proud," he told her one evening, watching her add color to another drawing, "and I think Emily would be too." Imani smiled, adding one final detail to her work: a small figure in a sheriff's uniform, standing guard over the children in the shadows. "They're not alone anymore," she said, "just like I'm not alone anymore." The truth had come full circle, revealed through the eyes and heart of a child who had found the courage not just to survive, but to help others survive too. As they waited for justice to be served, they knew that whatever the outcome, their family's legacy would live on in the lives of other children finding their way out of the darkness. The day the judge delivered her ruling, the courthouse was packed. People spilled out onto the steps: town residents, members of the Haitian community, officers in uniform, and most notably several children who had finally come forward from the shadows, each holding one of Imani's drawings. "In all my years on the bench," Judge Harrison began, "I've never encountered a case that has so thoroughly challenged our notions of family, duty, and community." She paused, her eyes moving from Tom to Imani, then to the gathered crowd. "The law is clear on many things, but it also recognizes that sometimes the strictest interpretation of rules must yield to a higher purpose. Sheriff Hollis didn't just take in a child, he exposed a crisis in our community that we had all chosen to ignore, and in doing so, he fulfilled the highest calling of law enforcement: to protect and serve all members of our community, regardless of their status or circumstances." The judge's ruling was comprehensive. Tom would retain full custody of Imani, with a path to legal adoption cleared. Moreover, his actions were deemed not just justified but commendable, his badge and position secure. But it was her additional orders that truly transformed the community. The Laundromat would be converted into a legitimate safe space for children in crisis, staffed by trained professionals. The task force would become permanent, with funding allocated for outreach programs. Most importantly, the other children who had been hiding would be given the same opportunity Imani had received: a chance at a real home, a real future. As the courtroom erupted in celebration, Deputy Johnson approached Tom, his wife by his side. "I was wrong," he said simply, extending his hand. "I let my own pain blind me to what you were really doing here." The two men shook hands, beginning the long process of healing not just their relationship, but the divisions within the department. Outside the courthouse, Reverend Green led a prayer of thanksgiving that bridged multiple faiths and languages. The Haitian community's songs mixed with traditional hymns, creating a new harmony that seemed to embody the change taking place in Bridgeton. But the real celebration happened later in Tom's backyard. The same space that had been empty and neglected for years was now filled with laughter, music, and the smell of both American and Haitian dishes. Children who had once hidden in shadows now played openly, their parents, some newly reunited, others newly appointed guardians, watching with tears of joy. Imani, surrounded by her artwork and her new extended family, pulled Tom aside. "I need to show you something," she said, leading him to her room. There she unveiled a new painting, a large canvas showing the laundromat, but transformed. Instead of darkness and hidden faces, it showed light streaming through windows, children being embraced, and at the center, a father and daughter, Tom and Imani, opening the door to welcome others in. "This is us now," she explained. "Not just our family, but everyone's family." Tom felt tears well up as he recognized other details in the painting: Marie watching from above, Sarah and Emily's spirits blessing the scene, and the faces of every person who had helped them on their journey. "You've given them more than just hope," Mrs. Rivera said, joining them. "You've given them permission to belong." As the evening wound down, Tom found himself sitting on the porch steps with Imani, just as they had done so many times before. But now, instead of uncertainty clouding their future, there was purpose and peace. "You know," Tom said, watching the fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, "your mother wrote in her diary that she dreamed of you having a big family one day. I don't think even she could have imagined just how big it would become." Imani leaned against him, her voice soft but sure. She knew. "Mama always said that love is like a light. The more you share it, the brighter it gets." Inside the house, voices called them to cut the celebration cake. As they stood, Tom caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window, no longer just a broken man and a lost girl, but a father and daughter who had found not just each other, but a whole new purpose in life. The laundromat would still stand, but now as a symbol of transformation rather than hiding. Its machines would still run through the night, but now offering warmth and safety openly rather than in secret. And in its windows, Imani's artwork would hang, telling the story of how one child's courage to trust and one man's courage to care had changed an entire community. "Ready to go in?" Tom asked, holding out his hand. Imani took it, smiling. "Ready, Dad. We've got more family waiting." Together they walked back into the light, leaving behind the shadows of their past and stepping into the future they had built, not just for themselves, but for all the children who would no longer have to hide in the dark. Sometimes the deepest wounds lead us to our greatest purpose. Tom lost his family and buried his heart in the night shift, while Imani lost her mother and found refuge in a laundromat's shadows. But what seemed like the end of their stories was actually just the beginning. In the quiet hours when the world sleeps, a broken man found a frightened child, and in saving her, he saved himself. Through their journey, we learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about the courage to love again when all hope seems lost. It's about finding strength in our deepest pain and using it to help others heal. Imani's mother wrote, "Love is like a light. The more you share it, the brighter it gets." Her words echo through their story, reminding us that even in our darkest moments, we're never truly alone. Every child hiding in the shadows, every parent grieving a loss, every person feeling lost and forgotten, they're all part of a larger tapestry of hope and healing. Through Tom and Imani's story, we see that our greatest tragedies can become our greatest gifts. Tom's loss of his wife and daughter opened his heart to a child who needed him. Imani's suffering gave her the compassion to help other hidden children. Their pain became purpose, their loss became love, their ending became a new beginning. Sometimes angels wear police badges, sometimes sanctuary is found in a 24-hour laundromat, and sometimes the family we're meant to have isn't the one we're born into, it's the one we find when we're brave enough to open our hearts again. Remember, every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind, be brave, be the light in someone's darkness. Because sometimes all it takes is one person willing to see past the shadows to change not just a life, but an entire community. In the end, we're all just children searching for home, all just hearts looking for healing, all just souls seeking light in the darkness. And like Tom and Imani, we might find that our deepest wounds become our greatest gifts to the world. Because love, like the light in a laundromat window on a dark night, has the power to guide lost souls home. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing it with those who might need a reminder that hope exists in the darkest times. Your likes, comments, and support give us the inspiration to bring more powerful stories like Tom and Imani's to life. For part 2 and more heartwarming tales, let us know in the comments below. Together, let's spread light and healing through storytelling.